Welcome back to Transcriber from Reddit. Today's topic is actually from a website. It's going to be a website read from the Roy's Report. From julieroys.com, we see an article titled, "Stop Taking Bonhoeffer's Name in Vain. His Relatives and Scholars Warn Eric Metaxas, Project 2025. This was written by Bob Smetana on October 21st, 2024, and was published at 5:28 p.m. Central Time. As of recording, this has 52 comments below the main article. Now, this article involves a written statement that Dietrich Bonhoeffer's relatives and scholars made, and that is going to be in a separate tab apart from this. Before I get into the article, I do want to thank his relatives and the scholars that have dug into Dietrich Bonhoeffer's work, and I want to continue to encourage them from at least my end for them keeping people that have this right-wing nationalist bent, such as Eric Metaxas, from misappropriating Dietrich Bonhoeffer. The more that I learn about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the more I realize why myself, having attended Wells Lutheran schools, never heard much about him. They would not have considered him a true Wells Lutheran, which to me at the time was shocking because he exemplified all of the things that I saw Christ exemplifying. However, I wonder if that isn't because Dietrich Bonhoeffer did his best to follow Christ's footsteps rather than Martin Luther and the Wells Church leadership steps. Anyway, that's something to think about. Below the title of the article, we see a black and white photo where there's many youths sitting on a riverbank. Below the photo, we read the description, Dietrich Bonhoeffer on a weekend getaway with confirmands of Zion's Church congregation in 1932, parentheses, photo courtesy of German Federal Archives / Creative Commons, end parentheses. Going back to the photo, the central figure is a white man with blonde hair that's parting in the middle and starting to disappear rather early for a man that appears to be in his 30s. And he's wearing very dark clothes, but he is in the front central part of the photograph. We don't see him smile here, but neither is he frowning. Possibly the most neutral face that he could have. I begin reading. In recent years, author and radio host Eric Metaxas and other conservative Christian supporters of Donald Trump have compared themselves to the famed German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was put to death for taking part in a plan to assassinate Adolf Hitler. In a recent interview on Flashpoint, linked here, a Christian television talk show on the Victory Network, both Metaxas, author of a best-selling biography of Bonhoeffer, and the show's host called the current election a, quote, Bonhoeffer moment, end quote, and urged Christians to rise up and oppose evil. That evil, in Metaxas' eyes, is the Democrats, who, he has argued, stole the 2020 election, linked here, and whom he often compares to Nazis. For him, if Democrats win the next election, it could mean the end of America as we know it. Metaxas has argued and has claimed in the past that Trump is God's chosen candidate and that those who oppose him oppose God. His newest book, quote, Religionless Christianity, end quote, a phrase used by Bonhoeffer, describes America's current politics as a spiritual war and sign of the end times, linked here. A group of Bonhoeffer scholars and the theologian's descendants have had enough. In a statement issued Friday, parentheses, October 18th, end parentheses, Members of the International Bonhoeffer Society called on Metaxas and others to stop comparing the current election to the rise of the Nazis. Linked here. Side note, once I'm done reading the article, I am going to go to that link to cover it, and I will also link it in the description below. I continue reading. The statement in particular called out Metaxas for social media posts featuring a gun and a Bible and his support of January 6 rioters. Bypassing a small blurb to support the Roy's report, we see a color photo of Eric Metaxas. Eric Metaxas is white with graying hair. I believe he's in his mid to late 60s. Here we see him at a podium, appearing to be addressing a crowd, with a suit and tie. Below the image, we read the caption, Eric Metaxas speaks at Judson University on September 26, 2018, in Elgin, Illinois, near Chicago. Parentheses. Photo courtesy of RNS/Emily McFarlane Miller, end parentheses. Quote, this portrayal glorifies violence and draws inappropriate analogies between our political system and that of Nazi Germany, end parentheses, end quote. The scholars said in a statement, which has been signed by more than 800 Bonhoeffer scholars and other Christian leaders. Quote, it is a dangerous misuse of Bonhoeffer's life and lessons, particularly in this election season in the United States, end quote.
The scholars and relatives of Bonhoeffer also objected to the mention of Bonhoeffer's work in Project 2025, a controversial plan from the Heritage Foundation and other Trump supporters, which has been criticized for promoting Christian nationalism. Linked here. Quote, from Project 2025 to violent political rhetoric, the legacy of German pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer is being invoked this election season on behalf of Christian nationalism, end quote. The scholars said in their statement. Quote, it is a dangerous and grievous misuse of his theology and life, end quote. The statement was prompted in part by the upcoming release of a new Bonhoeffer biopic, which will be out in theaters in late November, linked here. One of the posters for the film shows Bonhoeffer with a gun, and a trailer for the film shows his involvement in the plot to kill Hitler. Some of the early social media tweets about the film include messages about the, quote, battle against tyranny, end quote, and a line from the trailer, quote, my country was invaded from within, end quote, linked here. During Metaxas' Victory Channel interview, the trailer for the movie, which is being distributed by Angel Studios, the studio behind the hit film Sound of Freedom, was shown, linked here. After the trailer, Metaxas and other guests urged Christians to wake up to the evil of their political enemies, linked here. In an interview for a German news publication, relatives of Bonhoeffer criticized that depiction of the theologian. Relatives also released a statement Friday rejecting the idea that Bonhoeffer would have embraced Christian nationalism. To the left of this article, we see an image inserted where it is a poster for the film. The poster for the film features, in the center of it, a white man with blonde hair and light brown overcoat, suit, slacks, tie, and holding a gun in his right hand. To his left read the words, pastor, spy, assassin, Bonhoeffer. To his right, we see images of Hitler and then of an unknown woman. Probably the young woman who was under 18 that he was seeing romantically at the time, if I had to guess. I have not seen the film, so I don't know. Underneath the image reads the caption, Bonhoeffer film poster, parentheses, image courtesy Angel Studios, end parentheses. I continue reading. Quote, he would never have seen himself anywhere near the right-wing extremist, violent movements that are trying to appropriate him today, end quote, family members said in a statement passed on by Bonhoeffer scholars. Quote, on the contrary, he would have criticized these very attitudes, end quote. Metaxas' press contact did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Laurie Brandt Hale, professor of religion at Augsburg University and president of the English language section of the International Bonhoeffer Society, said scholars understand that filmmakers need to take artistic license, and they do not believe the filmmakers intend to send Christian nationalist messages. Hale, who has seen the film, said the movie, and even more so the marketing material, exaggerates the theologian's role in the conspiracy against Hitler and plays up the idea of him being an, quote, assassin, end quote. She and other scholars worry that may give viewers the wrong message, especially if they already hold Christian nationalist views or are sympathetic to Metaxas' claims, and they may use Bonhoeffer's opposition to Hitler to justify political violence. Hale said Bonhoeffer's theological and ethical reflections in the face of the evils of the Nazis are distorted by American Christian nationalists. In America's current politics, she fears Christian nationalists miss the real comparisons with Nazi Germany, including, quote, threats to political enemies, the free press, and the Constitution, and calls to dehumanize certain groups of people, especially immigrants and refugees, end quote. Quote, the people who make comparisons with Nazi Germany in contemporary realities, they are just not doing the work, end quote, she said. Below that, we see an image of a middle-aged white woman staring at us. Below that, we see as the caption, Laurie Brandt Hale, parentheses, photo courtesy International Bonhoeffer Society, end parentheses. I continue reading. The statement from the Bonhoeffer Society makes a similar point. Quote, any attempt to invoke Dietrich Bonhoeffer and his resistance against Hitler as a reason to engage in political violence in our contemporary context must be strongly opposed, end quote. It says, quote, moreover, while Bonhoeffer supported the coup, he refused to offer a Christian or theological justification for it. He understood the dangers of such a rationale, end quote. The promotional site for the film includes a call to reject racism and anti-Semitism and calls on supporters to practice civil discourse and peacemaking, linked here. A, quote, Bonhoeffer declaration, end quote, linked to the site also calls for fans to, quote, stand with Israel, end quote, and is endorsed by a number of Christian pastors, including some with Christian nationalist ties, linked here. Makers of the new Bonhoeffer biography reject the idea that the film has a Christian nationalist message. Jared Giese, chief distribution officer of Angel, said the film is being released at a time when anti-Semitism is on the rise and that the film calls audiences, quote, to stand up against evil and love our neighbor, no matter who that neighbor is, end quote. He also downplayed any connection to Metaxas and defended the poster promoting the film. Quote, the film is not based on the Eric Metaxas book, even though the titles may look similar, end quote, he said. Quote, the movie poster is simply a representation of the film. This is a spy thriller, and we believe the artwork captures the tension inherent in the story, end quote. Todd Komarnicki, writer and director of the Bonhoeffer movie, said he, quote, could not be further from being a Christian nationalist, end quote. Quote, the fact is, Bonhoeffer doesn't belong to any group, end quote, he said. Quote, he is a singular voice of love, grace, justice, and courage, and his voice is just as clarion now as it was during World War II. We should be listening to him, parentheses, which our movie does, end parentheses, and not to all the voices trying to steal him for their own cultural grievances, end quote. Below that, we see linked here the trailer for the Angel Studios movie Bonhoeffer. Again, it's Bonhoeffer, Pastor, Spy, Assassin. It's the official trailer, and it's on YouTube. Here ends the article. Below that reads in bold and italics, Bob Smetana is a national reporter for Religion News Service. All right. Having read the Roy's Report article, let's get to the official full statement released by Bonhoeffer relatives and the Bonhoeffer Society. It is a Google Drive link. Again, I will link it in the description below. It starts off with the German version. as much as I'm sure you really want to hear my mispronounced German, I am going to go to the English version below. But I find it personally really cool that they released two versions. There's the German version, and then there's the English version for those of us who do not speak German. Alright, here we are, the English version. At the top reads in red print, not for publication before Friday, October 18th, 2024, 0000 CET. And red. Below that, in bold, is the title that reads, Descendants, do not distort and misuse Dietrich Bonhoeffer, ! And bold. In regular text, we read, We are horrified to see how the legacy of Dietrich Bonhoeffer is increasingly being distorted and misused by right-wing extremists, xenophobes, and religious agitators. As direct descendants of the 7 siblings of the theologian and resistance fighter executed by the Nazis, we can testify based on what we learned from our families that he was a peace-loving, freedom-loving humanitarian. Never would he have seen himself associated with far-right, violent movements such as Christian nationalists and others who are trying to appropriate him today. On the contrary, he would have strongly and loudly condemned these attitudes. A key figure in this abuse is Eric Metaxas, whose 2010 biography of Bonhoeffer was first published in the United States and sold more than 1 million copies in 20 languages. In the book, he ignored the historical context and misrepresented Bonhoeffer as a fundamentalist evangelical. Metaxas, now a right-wing Trump supporter, regularly compares U.S. President Biden to Hitler, speaks of, quote, total war, end quote, and posts photos of a gun on a Bible. Quote, so we can now finally clearly see that Biden is our Hitler in 1933 to 34. See my Bonhoeffer book for details. The parallels are staggering and increasingly obvious. Pray for this nation. Pray. That last word, pray, is in all caps. End quote. The right-wing evangelical production company Angel Studios has secured the rights to a new Bonhoeffer movie, and this is now their advertisement on X. Quote, the battle against tyranny begins now. Watch Bonhoeffer, Pastor, Spy, Assassin. End quote. The accompanying image shows Dietrich Bonhoeffer holding a gun. The history-distorting biopic, which turns Bonhoeffer into an evangelical saint, is scheduled to hit theaters shortly after the U.S. presidential election. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was not a lone fighter. The Bonhoeffer family was a tight-knit unit and worked together closely during this time. Dietrich's brother Klaus and his brothers-in-law Hans von Dohnanyi and Rüdiger Schleicher were executed for their resistance activities just like Dietrich. Side note, please forgive me for any mispronunciations. I continue reading. They were driven by the search for truth, honesty, humanity, and the struggle for freedom, the rule of law, and democracy. They repudiated religious zealotry, nationalism, militarism, and blind obedience. Those who invoke Dietrich Bonhoeffer to justify anti-democratic, xenophobic aspirations are either misinformed or malicious. The tasteless trivialization of Bonhoeffer's legacy has encouraged this misuse. He was a complex thinker who was primarily concerned with ethical issues. Unlike the majority of Germans, he did not turn a blind eye to the disenfranchisement, oppression, and mass murder that took place under Nazi dictatorship. His quotes have been taken out of context and reduced to set pieces for all kinds of occasions. More recently, they have increasingly been used by many whose intentions are diametrically opposed to Bonhoeffer's thoughts and actions, ranging from Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation's proposed program for Trump, to the German right-wing extremist Bjorn Höcke. In a recent statement, theologians and historians who have studied Dietrich Bonhoeffer and his environment have again spoken out against this appropriation. We are grateful for this. We descendants can bear witness to the attitude passed on in the family. We grew up listening to frequent talk and debate about resistance to National Socialism, its motives and consequences. At a time when intolerance, anti-Semitism, and other forms of racism and xenophobia, nationalism, and authoritarianism are on the rise around the world, we believe it is important to clarify publicly. Dietrich Bonhoeffer fought narrow-mindedness, oppression, and exclusion throughout his life. The abuse of Dietrich Bonhoeffer's legacy by Christian nationalists and others is of such cynicism that we are unlikely to convince these demagogues. But we call on American voters in particular, do not be deceived. Look carefully at history. Only by working together in the spirit of freedom and concern for others will we be able to solve our problems. This is what Dietrich Bonhoeffer stands for. Responsible: Rogero Schleicher-Tapizer and Tobias Korenke, Berlin. October 17th, 2024. In bold, 86 of exactly 100 adult descendants of the Bonhoeffer siblings have signed this document. And bold, begin list: Christopher Beyer, Cornelius Beyer, Justus Beyer, Dietrich Bethke, Gabrielle Bode née Bethke, Leon Bode, Philip Bode, Sebastian Bode, George Bonhoeffer, Golda Sophia Bonhoeffer, Hannah Bonhoeffer, Jan Bonhoeffer, Jona Julian Bonhoeffer, Julia Bonhoeffer, Lena Bonhoeffer, Matthias Bonhoeffer, Moritz Bonhoeffer, Miriam Bonhoeffer, Nathan Bonhoeffer, Philip Bonhoeffer, Sebastian Bonhoeffer, Tobias Bonhoeffer, Walter Bonhoeffer, Christian Dietrich Brocker, Dorothy Brocker née Schleicher, Bruna Louise Casagrande née Butler, Babette von Donani, Christoph von Donani, Johannes von Donani, Justus von Donani, Klaus von Donani, Olga von Donani, Katja Jobek née von Donani, David Dress, Jochen Dress, Jona Dress, Klaus Ruprecht Dress, Yannick Dress, Aram Franke, Milena Ghetto, Kaspar Grossman, Cornelie Grossman née Bonhoeffer, Cornelius Grossman, Fabian Grossman, Johannes Grossman, Jonathan Grossman, Tobias Sophie Grossman, Sophie Hein née Rohrig, Svenja Hilbert née Grossman, Katharina Kenneman née Bode, Lorenz Kenneman, Lucas Kenneman, Charlotte Korenke, Christoph Korenke, Clara Korenke, David Korenke, Jacob Korenke, Jonas Korenke, Reuben Korenke, Teresa Korenke, Tobias Korenke, Sarah McHardy, Vincent McHardy, Sabine Moffat née Bethke, Jessica Moffat Rose, Constance Mueller née Bonhoeffer, Helen Mueller, Caroline Mueller Hofstede, Cornelia Mueller Hofstede née Korenke, Louise Mueller Hofstede, Therese Pennington Schleicher, Dorothy Rohrig née Bayer, Andreas Schleicher, Johannes Schleicher, Katharina Schleicher, Ruggiero Schleicher Tapischer, Jacob Schmidt, Johanna Schmidt, Anna Magdalena Schneider, Benjamin Schneider, David Soin Tapizer, Johanna Sido, Julia Sido, Ursula Sido, née Schleicher, Valentin Tapizer, David Zahn. That concludes the document that was written in protest of the misuse of Bonhoeffer's name. When I get a chance, I will also do a reaction to the ex-Lutheran post made about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I need to find some notes that I either myself or someone else had made for me regarding the Wells and their interpretation of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Considering that Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a Wells Lutheran, it makes him and how the Wells treats him even more interesting, especially in juxtaposition to Martin Luther, who is, to them, very important. The Wells would not say that they worship Martin Luther, but they definitely hold signs that they hold him in high regard. Not as high as the Catholics, for example, would hold the saints, but pretty damn close, in my less than humble opinion. However, when you have more recent examples of people like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who are better examples of Christ living among us, that it boggles my mind that the Wells does not hold them as important or as high as they should. No reading about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, no studying his life, no studying his theology, not even in, say, a critique sort of way to critique it against what the Wells teaches for theology. Nope, that will never happen. Anyway, that concludes this video. Please share if you found it useful. Again, all the links for this will be in the description below, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you.